Oh,
Well, just more music. Oh, Evelina's here.
very good. I managed to pause the music. Good. I didn't intend for all that to happen. Here we are back together once again.
Yes. Good to
Uh,
have you back. And Evelina's right on time. And we see Steve Wolfbranch is here too.
okay, great. This is Empowering Democracy, and I'm your host, Joe Firestone. I'm joined by my good friend, Dee Pierce, who is the host of Around the World with Dee and Friends. How are you tonight, Dee?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's good to have you back, Joe.
Well, thank you very much, Dee. And thank you, Evelina. Thank you very much. And Steve, it's great to see you as well. And it's great to be back. So, tonight we have just a mess of pieces to go through. And there are three from Pepe Escobar and two from Alastair Crooke and one from Jeff Sachs. And they go across a whole wide range of subjects. And we're going to do our best to go through the stuff and put it together for you before the end of the show, which I think is going to be a very substantial show. So, should we get started with some Facebook sharing?
Yes, I'm sharing right now, and if it'd be great if everybody could share. Let everybody know Joe's here.
Okay. Where's my Facebook? Here it is. Okay. Let's okay. Let's see what we got here.
I hope you're on not over at X yet, but I'll be going over there.
I'm sorry that they're what? What's that?
I have to go to over to X. I'll see if you're
Oh,
on
okay.
X.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I think we've already got some uh, sharing going on Facebook.
That's great.
So it looks like we've got some folks over there. Uh, and it will be good to find out what's going on Twitter. I think.
Okay, come on. Let me get over there. Okay, here we go. Let me see. Go on to your. Here we go. Joe Firestone. Oh, good. You're up.
Great.
Let me share that.
Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to get started with our first piece, and we shall alternate. Okay.
All righty, that sounds great.
So I'll share the first of the Pepe pieces. Uh, oh, there it is. There's Colby, huh?
Yeah, I think everybody's got to stick their voices into the situation. Let me mute myself.
Okay. Okay, this first piece is by Pepe Escobar. As I said, he originally did it on February 27th, 2025. So I would have covered it a long time ago if I were operational. But anyway, the headline on it is Baltic front slash Black Sea power games and red lines intersect in a quote strange war unquote. This is a brilliant piece by Pepe, but it's a riot too. But no one ever lost money betting on the batshit crazy quote policies unquote of the ferociously yapping Baltic chihuahuas. And I have to say, I don't understand what that is a photo of exactly. He doesn't say. I can't identify it. Maybe it's a power plant of some kind, but uh, no one ever lost money betting on the batshit crazy policies of the ferociously yapping Baltic Chihuahuas. Their latest power play of sorts is a drive to turn the Baltic Sea into a NATO lake. The notion that a bunch of Russophobic sub-entities have what it takes to expel the Russian superpower from the Baltic Sea and pose a threat to St. Petersburg does not even qualify as cartoonish. Yet that is indeed part and parcel of NATO's prefigured obsessions as their warmongering, quote, vanguard, unquote, has been relocated to a London, Warsaw, Baltic, Chihuahuas, Ukraine axis. Wow, that's fearsome. What kind of black hole rump, quote, Ukraine, unquote, will turn out to be after the end of the war, which may not even happen in 2025, remains to be seen. I don't know. I think there's a chance it may be gone in 2 to 3 weeks, the way the fighting is going on there now. What's certain is that in the case of a Ukraine axis, whatever the Ukraine exit, whatever the modalities, enter Romania. The whole electoral farce in Romania, complete with a demonization of election front-runner Kalin Georgescu, revolves around the upgrading of the Mihail Kogalniceanu base, which will become the largest NATO military base in Europe. Wow, in Romania? Right near Russia? That's insanity. So once again, this is all about the Black Sea. NATO wreaking havoc in the Black Sea carries way more savory prospects than NATO via Chihuahuas being successful in monopolizing the Baltic Sea. Ilya Fabrishnikov, a member of Russia's Council on Foreign and Defense Policy, has published a remarkable essay essentially focusing on the Black Sea. This is a short version on the Kommersant Daily. Fabrishnikov convincingly argues from a European UE/NATO angle, what really mattered in Ukraine was to move its borders, along with its military, political, and economic infrastructure, close to Russia's, to put under full control the strategic Black Sea trade corridor, which easily stretches further north along the Odessa-Gdansk route, in order to more conveniently and quickly explore the economic spaces of Asia and North Africa, and to begin dictating its terms to Russian supplies of oil, gas, and other resources needed by the European economy, unquote. Wow, that's a mouthful, and I think a very acute observation. As this focused power play instrumentalizing Ukraine is unraveling in real time, a replacement is needed, even as warmongering Eurocrats keep peddling their Orwellian, quote, peace is war, unquote, dementia nonstop, complete with a nonstop tsunami of sanctions and renewed promises of avalanches of weapons to Kyiv. Don't know where they're going to get those weapons from. They think they're going to get them from us. Well, Trump always wants to do business, I guess. This is a classic Brussels vassals affair, even as the toxic Medusa von der Leyen, also known as Ursula von der Leyen, as head of the European Commission, and Ruti Frutti, also known as Ruta, as the new head of NATO, were essentially appointed by Washington and London. Collectively, Europe has pumped way more military political funds into black hole Ukraine than the Americans. Of course, Trump keeps on saying that we put in 350 million, but that's not so. The reason is simple. For Europe, there's no plan B apart from that mirific, not sure I know what mirific means, quote, strategic defeat, unquote, of Russia. I've always thought my vocabulary is very extensive, but I would never try to compete with Pepe Escobar in that department. The EU/NATO Black Sea power play would make it even more imperative for Russia to connect with Transnistria. The only one who can answer whether this is part of the current planning is, of course, President Putin. Transnistria, of course, is that very small little external part of Russia that's kind of inside of it's actually geographically tied to Romania. And it's a very small part, but it's disconnected geographically right now from Russia. So it's an open question as to whether Russia will want to directly connect with it. Anyway, going on. Neo-Nazis go pipeline bombing. Russian intel is very much aware that the Europeans have to some extent already carved up their own areas in Ukraine, from ports to mines. Not surprisingly, the Brits via MI6 are ahead of the Continentals, quote unquote, mostly Germany. All that intertwines with the extremely murky weapons for metals deal clinched by Trump 2.0 with the totally illegitimate sweatshirt actor turned gangster in Kyiv. The only thing that matters for Trump is to get U.S. money back. Whether the total bill is $500 billion or less, actually much less, says Pepe. And I agree, it is much less. Into this kabuki steps in the real power in Kyiv after the proclamation of martial law, the National Defense and Security Council of Ukraine. The unelected, actually illegal actor is not taking any major decisions for some time now. These are issued by the former head of the Foreign Secret Service, Alexander Litvinenko. It was the council that on February 17th ordered the bombing of the crucial pipeline owned by the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, CPC, linking Kazakhstan to Novorossiysk in Ukraine, I believe, exporting loads, I'm sorry, I'm not sure whether that's in Ukraine or a city, in Russia, exporting loads of Kazakh and Russian oil. Crucially, CPC shareholders, including Italy's Eni, the Caspian Pipeline Company, which is a subsidiary of ExxonMobil, 7.5%. By the way, Eni owns 2%. And the Caspian Pipeline Consortium, which is a subsidiary of Chevron, which owns 15%. Pepe goes on to say, well, that's not very bright. The, quote, integral nationalists, unquote, code for neo-Nazis in Kyiv decided to bomb a partially owned American asset. Not only there will be blowback by Trump 2.0, not only Will there be blowback by Trump 2.0? It is already on. On the equally murky rare earths front, Putin's recent interview to Channel 1 seems to have thrown everyone off balance. Russia, he said, has way more rare earths than Ukraine, especially since it has the Ukrainian rare earths in the former eastern part of Ukraine that it has annexed, and is, quote, ready to work with our foreign partners, including the U.S., unquote, to develop these deposits. That's classic Sun Tzu Putin. Sun Tzu Putin, huh? That's a metaphor in itself. The Americans won't have rare earths to exploit in the future rump Ukraine because they don't exist. But they can be partners with Russia in Novorossiya. All of the above, of course, would presuppose a solid U.S.-Russia negotiation on Ukraine, and yet Trump 2.0 still does not seem to grasp the real Russian red lines. 1, no temporary ceasefire, quote, along the front line, unquote. 2, no trading of new territories acquired in the battlefield. 3, no NATO or European, quote, peacekeepers, unquote, in the western borders of Russia. The next section is called Putin Discombobulating Trump. As it stands, Washington and Moscow remain divided by an abyss. Mr. Disco Inferno, I remind you that refers to Trump, simply cannot make serious concessions or de facto recognize the strategic defeat of the empire of chaos, because that would seal the definitive end of unilateral hegemony. Putin, for his part, simply will not give away the hard-won victories on the battlefield. Russian public opinion expects nothing less. After all, Russia holds all the cards, leading to a possible negotiation. The EU, NATO will never admit their own self-inflicted strategic defeat. Hence, those Baltic Black Sea dreams, which carry the extra self-inflicted fantasy of disrupting China's new Silk Roads as much as isolating, quote unquote, Russia. Putin is actually performing virtual somersaults to instill some common sense. In his Mr. Disco Inferno, he noted how, on U.S.-Russia relations, quote, this first step should focus on increasing the level of trust between the two countries. This is exactly what we have been doing in Riyadh. And this is what our next high-level contacts will be devoted to. Without this, it is impossible to solve any issue, including one as complex and acute as the Ukraine crisis, unquote. Trust is far from being established, especially vis-a-vis a Lavrov-defined, quote, non-agreement capable, unquote, empire of chaos with its global credibility in tatters. Add to it bombast after bombast manufactured to control the news cycle 24/7. The preferred Trump 2.0 modus operandi. None of it leads to that prime diplomatic mantra, quote, confidence building, unquote. And it will get even murkier and way more dangerous if Russian public opinion is confronted with the fact that after 11 years fighting a vicious proxy war with the empire of chaos, they may become partners in strategic industry sectors that Putin himself defined as essential to Russia's national security. Just like that. Or that may be just Putin discombobulating Trump with some unforeseen Sun Tzu gambit. Sun Tzu, of course, is that wonderful ancient Chinese philosopher. Earlier this week, I had a fabulous off-the-record conversation with Sergei Glaziev, formerly with the Eurasian Economic Union, EAU, and now leading the consolidation of the Union State, that is the consolidation of Russia and Belarus. It was up to Mr. Glatziev to come up with a definitive summary of everything unrolling before our eyes. And his summary was, quote, "This is a very strange war," unquote. So, Dee, what did you think of that piece by Pepe?
Okay, I love the way he writes. He puts everything together in a just in a great way. The way he does it, the way he
He
tells
puts
the story.
he puts everything together in an almost visual picture of what is going on,
Yes.
and he uses slang in a wonderful way. Okay, and it's multinational slang.
Right. So he has the reader's attention.
Yes, he has our attention. We're always trying to understand his use of slang and who he's referring to when he uses the slang.
Yes.
It's not always completely obvious. But the geopolitics of what he wrote here, I thought, was very comprehensive with respect to his inferences about the plans of the West in relation to Ukraine.
Hmm.
Okay, and the attempts to put together that trade corridor that would be strongly influencing the Russian sales of oil to the West, and that this was one of the critical goals, okay, of the Ukrainian project. Uh, I didn't really fully realize that. I think that's a very, very good insight. But then there's the further insight of, well, since this is failing, there has to be some substitute for it, and that's going to go through Romania. I hadn't even begun to think of what was going to happen to Romania after Ukraine, okay, is settled. But I'm sure Putin and Lavrov have been thinking about that as well.
Yes. Well, there's trade wars everywhere because we have the same thing. That's where Trump with interest with the Panama.
Yes,
Panama.
and of course his interest with Canada and Mexico
Hmm.
as well. I mean, he just dumped further tariffs on aluminum and steel for Canada today, and also further tariffs on Mexico. And this is in retaliation to their retaliation to his initial starting of the trade war. So he is escalating, and this is just a few days after he told everybody that he was going to conform to the trade agreement that he himself concluded in his first term. And he said all the products under that particular trade agreement were not going to be tariffed. And here he is 2 days later slapping tariffs on aluminum and steel. I
Well,
mean,
where
this is
China's,
crazy.
where Canada is concerned, they have that new, since Trudeau stepped down, they have the new prime minister, and he said that he was uh, going forward with the tariffs where the U.S. was concerned. They weren't backing down.
Well, but he didn't say, okay, in other words, if Trump had gone ahead with the USMCA, at that point, he wasn't going to have any tariffs on the United States. Okay, but it's when Trump started talking tariff again that, okay, in other words, his statement on tariffs was conditional. Basically, if the U.S. persists in tariffs, then we're going to retaliate.
But that's what Trudeau said.
Yeah, that's what Trudeau said, and that's what the new Prime Minister of
Oh, no-
Canada is also.
okay. Oh, because I heard him say yesterday when he took over, I heard him saying that they were, you know, the tariffs were started, that they were, weren't
Yeah,
playing games.
yeah. Well, the tariffs were started because
Oh, I
Trump.
know originally why they were starting it, but they They just are saying we're not messing around. And now China has retaliated with Canada because Canada put the 100% tariffs on China 4 months ago. So China reciprocated with tariffs 100% on Canada. So it's just
Yeah,
tariff.
uh, b- uh, but I think Canada is probably going to withdraw from the tariffs with China.
I hope they do.
I mean, I'm quite sure they do because I think they want the electric cars from China,
They do.
and they don't want 100% tariffs, on those electric cars.
Well, they have to stop, like you said, they have to stop their tariffs that they started 4 months ago.
Yes, they do, but I think they will simply because they want the electric cars, right?
Right. And see now, what do I got to say? About a month or so ago, there was talk going on with China and Canada, um, them getting closer because of with the situation with the U.S., but still, those tariffs are still in place. So hopefully they do stop it.
Hopefully, they will stop it because those tariffs will be lethal for Canada.
Right. It's all directions.
Yes, it's all directions. They have to decide. Uh, I think they have to decide who they're going to be in line with, but also the people they get into line with are going to have to end those tariffs.
Yes.
Uh, oh, I see some comments. Evelina says, sounds like a word invented by Pepe for the occasion, something to do up, up with mirrors. Yes. Okay. Or mirage. Yes. Uh, Farsti says, Romania detains 6 on suspicion of plotting a coup in collusion with Russia. Uh, well, it's debatable whether that's a coup. In other words, the person who was running uh, for the presidency or the prime ministership, I forget which it is, and um, uh, in Romania, uh, was already cooed by the collective West. In other words, it looked like it was going to be a victorious election for him, and the partisans of the West then pulled off a coup inside of Romania. So now they're detaining 6 on suspicion of plotting a coup in collusion with Russia. Well, I would say what's good for the goose is good for the gander. Quote, 2 suspects allegedly traveled to Moscow and had contact with people who supported the organization's, quote, efforts to take our state power in Romania, police said. And quote again, it's hard to believe that you still saying Putin's a good guy. Russian imperialism is a threat to the sovereignty of the European nation, Doc. You're on the side of fascism. Don't be ridiculous, Friar Steve. I'm not on the side of fascism. What Trump is trying to do with Canada is what Putin did with Ukraine. It starts with denying their sovereignty. Well, I agree with that statement. Frosty says, no, there are not trade wars everywhere. It's only Trump starting a tariff war with our neighbors. This is what Putin wants. Well, it's certainly what Trump wants. I don't know if it's what Putin wants. Frosty says, I hope the boycott of all Tesla products continues. Me too. Again, Trump helping our enemies, allowing EV sales to explode doesn't help the U.S. Well, I certainly agree with that. Tariffs hurt U.S. consumers. They do. I'm not for any of these tariffs, Rusty. Person running for president was as linked to the Russians as Trump is. Not sure what. Yeah, the person running for president was linked to the Russians, but so what? He was winning the frickin' election. I mean, doesn't a person who wants to have the close relations with Russia have the right to run in a supposedly democratic state and win? Evelina says, not sure what Russia has to do with tariffs, okay, on Canada. Now, I'm not sure what Russia has to do with tariffs on Canada either.
I don't either.
Yes, that's very funny. Okay, let's get on to the next piece. Do you want me to put it up, Dee, or will you put it up?
Yes. Oh, you can put it up.
Okay, so let me share the screen for it. It is Pepe's second piece of the night, and it's about the Chinese AI models. It's a fascinating piece, this one.
Okay, let me make this larger over here.
Okay, can you see it?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, here we go. Pepe Escobar from March 3rd, 2025. Why Chinese models are stunning Americans in the tech catwalk.
And there's a graphic with deep seek on it, basically.
The empire of chaos will not take the competition lightly. The Middle Kingdom is unfazed and ready to rock and roll.
It's rock and roll, folks.
When President Xi Jinping hosted a recent rare meeting with an array of Chinese tech superstars, including a quote rehabilitated Jack Ma, Alibaba's founder, he urged them to quote show their talent, code for going for broke in the tech war with the US. It was no wonder that young Wenfeng, founder of AI sensation DeepSeek, was among the guests. DeepSeek threw not only Silicon Valley, but the whole somewhat paranoid US national security ecosystem completely off balance. Yet, Beijing's emphasis is not subversion, but a second drive towards building an AI system totally independent from US monolithic pressure and NVIDIA products. Alibaba, Huawei, and Tencent will likely align the infrastructure with DeepSeek.
Okay, there a comment that should be entered.
Mhm.
Okay, that the bias of the U.S. development system towards the NVIDIA products has been apparent for some time. It existed in the Biden administration, and it now exists in the Trump administration. Okay, and it's basically affecting the direction, okay, of AI. The Chinese have a, a, adopted a different strategy, which is more tied to allowing a bunch of entrepreneurs to get in
Mhm.
and to develop the AI sector. Please go on, Dee.
Okay. This process is perfectly synchronized with the Made in China 2025 project, which has already propelled China to the leadership position in several sectors, from electric vehicles, batteries, and solar panels to smart grids and advanced manufacturing. The final breakthroughs will be on top semiconductors and aerospace. It's now common knowledge that DeepSeek's development was not a product of Silicon Valley labs, showered with billions of dollars of research funds. Ling Wenfeng himself revealed it. Quote, I wouldn't lie, our AI was created on the basis of Soviet developments, the OGAS system of Academian Glushkov. The Wonders of History, a Soviet marvel auctioned off for a pittance, 15,000 in 1995, possibly because it was considered worthless, is now the backbone of China's new digital revolution.
Okay, that 15,000 was $15,000,
Yeah,
U.S. dollars.
that's a lot. And
Well, I don't know how
not
much.
a yeah, maybe it's a pittance back in 1995 for some people. Yeah, but considering the value of it now, what it's really is, people that really didn't know about it back then. And
Yes, absolutely, but I think it's really ironic that it was considered worthless and is now the backbone of China's efforts in the AI area. I mean,
mm,
that's tremendously ironic.
it is because no one really. You never know. I guess somebody's junk, or what you consider junk.
Yeah, it turned out not to be junk.
Exactly. Physics heavyweight quantum bird, formerly with the CERN in Geneva, is adamant. Quote, the Americans lost the plot. It's all about models employing less computing power and less data. NVIDIA high-performance GPUs costing 40,000 consume too much energy. Then
I'll
there's
emphasize there. That's 40,000 for a single GPU.
yeah.
Okay, please go on.
Then there's financial speculation. Raspberry Pi, a small single board computer the size of a credit card and with a simple processor costing $50 for students, they may run DeepSeek, consuming less energy than a cell phone.
Okay, so this is a profound sort of quote here. Okay, the Raspberry Pi, the small single board computer, has been around forever. I forget how long, but I wouldn't be surprised to find that it's been around since the 1990s.
Hmm.
Okay, it is very small, size of a credit card, simple processor, and the idea that you could run the DeepSeek AI model by buying that single board computer for $50 and running this model that's competitive, with the best in the world. I mean, it's just incredible to think of it that way. Whereas, okay, if you want to run uh, the chat uh, uh, type of model, uh, okay, that's run with a number, okay, of NVIDIA GPUs. Uh, I think it's quite a large number, actually,
Hmm.
that's behind that. And I mean, the comparison of cost is really amazing here. And the observation that the Americans lost the plot, uh, okay, because it was the idea that it's about using models employing less computing power, and less data. That's absolutely essential for further development and for scaling up. And the reason why our people were losing the plot was because of the huge profits that they could get if they got into the NVIDIA ecology. I mean, everybody who was involved in there, was getting rich. And that's what they cared about. And they didn't care about employing less computing power, okay, and less data to fuel the AIs. Okay, please go on.
And that's just the beginning. Quantum Bird adds, quote, when Russia and China come up with their first lithographic machine, it was Silicon Valley that pushed the world to this. Russia-China scientists have already accelerated scientific computing on conventional NVIDIA graphics cards by 800 times, creating a new algorithm using reverse engineering. That was pulled off by a joint group of scientists from MSU PPI University in Sheshan. Established in 2014 by Lomonosov Moscow State University and Beijing Polytech Institute.
Right. Okay. So to remark on that, the idea that they took not even the high-end NVIDIA graphics cards, but the conventional NVIDIA graphics cards, and that they accelerated the computing by 800 times. I mean, that's an incredible achievement, folks.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it
An
is.
achievement. And it means that AI computing in China could be far cheaper than AI computing here in the United States. Please go on.
In parallel, researchers using made in China GPUs have already boasted 10 times their performance over US supercomputers relying on NVIDIA hardware. US tech sanctions? Who cares?
Yep.
Counterpunching sanctionmania.
Yep.
Chinese scientists are not intimidated by any challenges on hardware. Production of advanced GPUs like the A100 and H100 is a foreign monopoly. On software, NVIDIA has restricted its CUDA software ecosystem from running on third-party hardware. That's a serious problem for those working on independent algorithms. These may not be insurmountable problems when a rolling wave of Chinese scientists is coming back home to China, mostly from the US.
Yeah.
Take Qingzhou University chip superstar Sun Tan. Xingzhao's social media recently revealed that Sun Nan came back in 2020 after many years in the US to, quote, train chip professionals for China and solving the manufacturing problems of mid and high-end chip technology. The key sectors, once again, are semiconductors and quantum computing. Nothing Trump 2.0 will throw at China in terms of, quote, tech containment will alter the Chinese drive. Sun Tan and his team have already come up with high-performance circuit design tech they integrated into more than 50 chips used in the Chinese power grid, high-speed rail, industrial measurement and control, instrumentation, and electric vehicles. Countering the American drive to derail China's development in AI and chip-making equipment, interconnected Sun Tzu maneuvers paint the picture of Chinese transformation of current supply chains, fomenting a tech crisis in the West itself. That is a key reason for Trump's obsession with Greenland and Ukraine's rare earth potential. Sanctionmania has been going on since 2017, when Trump started to impose a 60% tariff on Chinese imports. The cadaver in the White House administration then slapped a 100% tax on Chinese EVs and dozens of export controls on China via coercion of its own, quote, allies, such as Holland's ASML and South Korea's Hynix and Samsung. Trump 2.0 will come up with a renewed charge of the heavy brigade quite soon. By 2018, China was entirely dependent on Western tech. That was a time when telecom towers came from Ericsson GPUs and chips for neural networks from NVIDIA and cars from the European giants. Now it's a completely different ball game, a blowback game.
And it's only 8 years.
Yeah,
I mean, 7 years. 2018 to 2025.
yeah. Huawei leads in global telecom equipment. BYD is the world's top producer of electric vehicles, ahead of Tesla since last year. Huawei is ahead of Google in smartphone processor shipments, also since last year. Xiaomi will launch its own smartphone processor this year. Huawei's Ascend 910B chip is already just 5% behind NVIDIA's AI products and 70% cheaper. Huawei is vertically integrated with its own chip design and manufacturing supply chain, offering mobile operating systems, Harmony OS Next, electric vehicles, streaming services, and autonomous driving. How to directly benefit society. Apart from DeepSeek, ByteDance, Baidu, Alibaba, and O1.ai have all developed their own sophisticated LLM models. China not only China not only already leads in industrial AI applications from robotics and drones to autonomous driving, it is also metastasizing its industrial, technological, and economic breakthroughs into military power. Example, the recently launched world's first sixth generation fighter prototypes. Not only one, but two. Simultaneously, the world's first drone carrier, the first hypersonic stealth unmanned airplanes for strike and reconnaissance, the first stealth unmanned warship, and the most powerful long-range air defense systems. China is advancing at breakneck speed in directed energy weapons, military 5G, atomic timing, and space warfare systems. As highlighted here, quote, China's nuclear fusion device, uh, experimental advanced superconducting tokamak East Physics World wrote, produced a steady state high confinement plasma for 1066 seconds, breaking East's previous 2023 record of 403 seconds. This last development is an advanced for the potential of a fusion power plant, a promise of almost limitless clean energy without significant radioactive waste. China trades mostly with the global south, more than 50% of total. Trade with the US is less than 3% of its GDP as of last year. This is about China's digital Silk Road progress across Eurasia Economic Union, EAEU member states. Here we see how China is shaping the EAEU geostrategically, positioning itself at the heart of the high tech and innovation in Eurasia, promoting advanced tech cooperation with Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Kazakhstan. China's tech companies all but conquered the EAEU high technology markets. The mantra uniting all of the above, of course, detailed planning. That includes, for instance, the quote, East Data, West Computing drive, which aims to transfer data intensive computing to Western China to reduce energy strain in the East. The absolute key battleground in the tech war ahead will, of course, be the global south. China is relentlessly leveraging its notorious manufacturing dominance and massive financial backing to offer an alternative ecosystem in semiconductors and AI. In sharp contrast, the Americans under Trump 2.0 predictably will coerce their allies' vassals to reinforce their own tech ecosystem. Total divergence in supply chains and tech standards is all but inevitable. This July 2024 interview with Liang Wenfeng, originally published in China by An Yang, remains essential to understanding what's behind the Chinese drive to totally redefine the rules of tech innovation. Wenfeng is adamant, quote, we're done following, it's time to lead. He sees competition in crystal clear terms. Quote, I focus on whether something can elevate social efficiency, italics mind, efficiency, and whether we can increase our strength in the value chain. Excuse me. It's an honor italics mine, honor to give back. As Chinese scholar Quan Li has noted, Liang Wenfeng's quote, intention of enhancing personal and collective creativity, thus directly benefiting the society, is not at all on the same epistemological level of a quote, mindless consumerism society. It's about the common good, not about a Wall Street killing. All set for a do or die US China tech duel ahead. No one really knows what a bombast driven Trump 2.0 administration will come up with. There will always be an undercut of economic pragmatism, but that will be constantly offset by an ideological and strategic iron wall dividing both parties. Meanwhile, China will keep betting on a stream of young innovators and entrepreneurs in business tech to somewhat bridge the divide. The empire of chaos will not take the competition lightly. The Middle Kingdom is unfazed and ready to rock and roll.
Well,
That pretty much says it all. I mean, we're seeing that.
yeah, we're seeing that, and what we're seeing, okay, is that China is using, okay, industrial policy
Yes,
in order to very quickly catch up to and outdistance the collective West in terms of technology,
right,
in terms of AI, in terms of quantum computing. Uh, and we seem to have no answers because we ourselves seem to adhere to a kind of anarchic model in order to develop technology because we see the anarchy as being a sign of strength, but it isn't really anarchy. I mean, what's going on is that we allow basically venture capitalists bent on profit in order to direct our development
right,
instead of having the government follow industrial policy for the public purpose in order to drive development. Okay, and also uh, to have a government that's devoted to public purpose and not to maximizing the profits of the monopolist. So here's another area where the neoliberal ideology we've been following has been causing us to, it's been allowing the Chinese to catch up. And we seem to have a situation where they're shortly going to be ahead of us in all kinds of ways. And given the ideology of the new administration and its tight, uh, its tight binding to the Silicon Valley uh, monopolistic entrepreneurs, okay, of Silicon Valley, and allowing them in their venture capital sector uh, to try to direct our development in such a way as to maximize profits. Uh, it seems like the Chinese are just going to vastly outdistance us in a short period of time. I hate to think what things are going to look like 10 years from now. If they've caught up and are threatening to go ahead in 8 years since 2018, and we don't seem to have any counter efforts building to what they're doing in China right now. So, I mean, all I see is the prospect of the collective West, including the United States, becoming a backwater very, very quickly within a quarter of a century. I mean, these new innovations, okay, are going to spread to the global South, and we will be excluded from developments because we'll be trying to construct an ecosystem which essentially tries to restrict supply chains uh, for the benefit of of our monopolies or great industrial powers. Where China just makes deals with other nations, which they present, as good deals for all sides, and which are collaborative in character. And we keep on using the old models, the old ideas, okay, of neoliberalism. I
And we
think,
see neoliberalism's always been a failure.
well, it's been a failure for us over a long period of time. It's resulted in an oligarchical society and in control of direction of all developments in ways that, make profit for the oligarchy. So I think for us, in comparison with the Chinese, the future is looking rather dim. Okay, let's see what further comments we have. And Willie Bragg is here. Hi, Willie.
Yes, hello, Willie. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you, Willie. So we have further comments by Friar Steve. Stole NVIDIA technology and reverse engineered it. I didn't know reverse engineering was stealing technology. I mean, I think what you're saying is that they bought some NVIDIA chips, which last time I checked is not the same as stealing, and reverse engineered the technology, which is also not the same as stealing. I don't think in doing that they're violating any patents, do you? Frosties, what you're saying is government sanctions industrial espionage by the Chinese government, inclusion with the Russians. Well, is that what I'm saying? I wasn't aware I was saying that, but you're free to make whatever interpretations you want. I never hear you criticizing the Chinese military industrial complex. Why is that? Because this is not about criticizing the military industrial complex of any particular society. First of all, you haven't heard me criticizing our military industrial complex very much. I don't think. I haven't focused on that. I've focused on the oligarchy, okay, and, the migration away from a democracy, but completely apart from that. The reason why I don't spend my time in criticizing the military industrial complex of China is because that military industrial complex doesn't seem to be devoted to hegemonic control of the world. Whereas our military industrial complex has been oriented in that way. It's there to preserve our hegemony. I don't like our hegemony. I don't like any hegemony. I don't think we're going to have Chinese hegemony. But that remains to be seen, of course. But if we do have it, then I'm sure I'll be very critical of their military industrial complex. Silicon Valley is civilian. Silicon Valley is increasingly made up of civilian oligarchs. It's not about civilian versus military. It's about the emergence of oligarchy in the United States. Charged China with industrial espionage. We're not going to get very far with that. You criticize NATO, Doc. Of course, I criticize NATO. It's been an instrument of uh, the hegemonic drive of the United States since the 1990s. But it's not a question of criticizing NATO. It's a question of whether NATO has the possibility of existence going into the future. I mean, what is the interest of NATO? Now, you believe it has a future because you believe the Russians are going to threaten Europe, with military domination. That's where we disagree, Friar Steve. I don't believe that. Any comments, Steve?
No, we can move along.
Okay, let's move along. This is the third of the pieces by Pepe tonight. The three pieces span a very wide area. Okay, this is yours, Dee.
No, it's yours. I just read.
Oh, you just read the other one. I'm sorry. Paralyzed by acute dementia, Europe declares war on Russia all over again. Yes, Europe declares war on Russia from time to time. Usually when Europe declares war on Russia, it loses. That's an interesting graphic. A Euro army. On the right, on your right, okay, is von der Leyen. On your left is the little Napoleon, Macron. The SML will keep rolling on as the Europeans want it to the last Ukrainian. Let's start with the U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio's road to Damascus movement. Quote, frankly, it's a proxy war between nuclear powers, the United States helping Ukraine and Russia, and it needs to come to an end, unquote. Now that's a howler, Jeff Sachs to the rescue. Of course, the correct formulation would be, quote, proxy war launched by the United States, but still, hallelujah, such illumination by proxy from heavens above could never have hit the previous American Secretary of Genocide. Now cut to panic, total European panic. Le Petit Roi, as popular in France as nighttime mosquitoes in a five-star beach resort, now there's a visual for you, has declared that peace in Europe is only possible with a, quote, tamed, unquote, Russia, and that Russia is a direct threat to France and Europe. On Ukraine, he pontificated that peace simply could not take place under Russian terms or via the inevitable Ukrainian surrender. Le breathless Petit Roi literally went nuclear. He stressed that France possesses a nuclear deterrent and offered it to the rest of Europe. Has France got enough of a deterrent to offer it to the rest of Europe? I mean, France has only a small stock of nuclear weapons compared to Russia's stock. Well, maybe you could go and ask the Russians to sell some of their nuclear weapons to the rest of Europe. While insisting that Europe's future should be dictated by Moscow or Washington. I'm sorry, should not be dictated. Sorry, I read that badly. By Moscow or Washington. The Petit Roi Napoleonically all but declared war on Russia. Well, the fact remains the overwhelming majority of France would gladly agree that the mini Napoleon should be dispatched to the battlefields on the black soil of Novorossiya right away, where he would surrender in less than 5 minutes, waving a rainbow flag as he realizes he's about to be turned into an instant steak tartare. Now there is another visual from Pepe. Now couple the Moliere farce with the fate of the much larger, fatter, pan-European new model woke army, regimented by the Führer and SS van der Lugen out of Brussels, allegedly to be financed to the tune of 800 billion euros, money that no one has and would have to be loaned, then repaid with sky-high extortion rates. He spelled extortion wrong here. Interest rates to the usual international financial system vultures. SS van der Lugen insists Europe is in danger, so the solution is a massive expansion of the military-industrial complex. In practice, buying more overpriced American weapons and, quote, rearmament, unquote. Talk about Götterdämmerung on crack. Were the new model woke army ever to come to light, surrender would also be a matter of less than 5 minutes. Brandishing rainbow flags as its woke warriors would face the dire prospect of being Oreshnicked to a pile of charcoal grilled burgers. There's another visual from Pepe. Add to it the return of the Nord Stream saga with a new plot twist. Cy Hirsch conclusively proved that the Nord Streams were bombed under orders of the previous crash test dummy regime in Washington. Now, Nord Stream 2 at least would be back in business via a not-so-secret U.S.-Russia deal involving Gazprom and American oligarchs. All that while fanatics in Berlin assure right and left they want to explore every possible way to prevent the Nord Stream system from being repaired, because after all, no one, especially the new BlackRock chancellor, of Germany, the new German chancellor, can deviate from the official policy of destroying the German economy by all means necessary. Compounding the Kafkaesque scenario, the Prime Minister of Denmark, which is on the brink of losing Greenland one way or another to Trump 2.0, immortalized the words, quote, peace in Ukraine will be more dangerous than war, unquote. The Polish Prime Minister did not miss a beat, adding that, quote, Europe is stronger than Russia and capable of winning in any military, financial, or economic confrontation, unquote. Europe is in such a, quote, winning, unquote, streak now, as the record shows. All this discombobulated Tower of Babel proves without a shadow of a doubt that Europe is geopolitically and geoeconomically dead and buried. No Teutonic gods, complete with fat ladies singing, will be able to resurrect it. Flirting with a one-way ticket back to the Stone Age. The notion that Europe is able to pose a military threat to Russia does not even qualify as trashy propaganda for sub-zero IQs. It would take at least a decade to remilitarize Germany, as its economy is simply moribund, serially stabbed by unmanageable energy costs. Russia, for its part, is protected from a possible nuclear attack by Le Petit Roi's puny umbrella arsenal by the most sophisticated missile defenses in the world. The Aegis defensive missiles in Poland are relatively worthless, even if their prime danger to Russia remains the system can be converted to handle offensive missiles. As a whole, the Aegis, the Patriot, THAAD, PAC-3, SBIR, high ground-based infrared systems are all relatively useless. Other than the US, NATO simply has no military worth, in Washington under Trump 2.0 simply will not be involved in the next European war. The U.S. has satellite systems for targeting, but no one else in NATO has them, with the U.S. pulling out in the event of a hypothetical von der Leyen-led new woke army attack against Russia. Russian missiles can knock out all European ports, airports, and manufacturing energy systems in a day, max, instantly returning Europe to the Stone Age. This applies to England, France, Germany, not to mention assorted chihuahuas, all of NATO. Russia can knock out all British power systems with zircons launched from a conventional submarine. Stone Age, here we come. Russian hypersonic missiles cannot be intercepted. Meanwhile, President Putin insists on talking sense to lunatics. At the collegia of the FSB on February 27, he noted how, quote, some Western elites are still determined to maintain instability in the world, and these forces will try to disrupt and compromise the dialogue with the U.S. that has begun. We see this. We need to take this into account and use all the possibilities of diplomacy and special services to disrupt such attempts. As Andrei Martyanov has noted, superpowers have, quote, only two options in the 21st century. Either start World War III, which will end with the nuclear exchange, or find a modus vivendi. That's a conversation for adults that automatically excludes the European hospice and the childish tantrums of the cracked actor in Kiev. The cracked actor never had any italics mine cards. He now cuts a pathetic figure, doing somersaults to cling to power. Propped by former collective West money, weapons, and massive propaganda. Now the 404 nation he, quote, created, unquote, is losing not only the war, but the PR war as well. The former advisor to the head of Zelensky's office, Oleksiy Arestovich, as slimy as they come, but always with his pulse on reliable info, is convinced that the Ukrainian army, blind and cross-eyed, can hold out at best for another 1.5 to 2 months without all those American goodies. Without intel data, Kiev's forces cannot prepare strikes against the Russian Federation or conduct cyber ops or reconnaissance. Country 404 as a whole is now entering Walking Dead territory. Europe, with or without its SS von der Leyen invincible armada, does not have the industrial capacity, the financial might, and the military capability to stop the debacle. Russia has already stated that any European peacekeeping tropes will immediately become legitimate targets. The spectacular failure of Project Ukraine is a sight to behold. It's no wonder the current tawdry, ghastly political, quote, elites, unquote, are in total panic. Without Project Ukraine and without the mafia protection of his master's voice, they are just geopolitically an irrelevant, post-colonial small peninsula on the western borders of fast integrating Eurasia. As for Trump 2.0 and the Kremlin already having hit some sort of pre-deal, even before the start of serious negotiations, there's no evidence yet to corroborate it. According to Russian intel sources, what has been struck is a general agreement on the framework of discussions and what can be achieved in practice. This initial stage will last at least a few months. Themes on the table range from lifting sanctions on Russian banks and the use of MIR cards to restoring direct flights and curbing the militarization of the Arctic. Everything essentially hinges on whether Trump wants and is able to ensure a fast endgame in Ukraine while disengaging slowly but surely from NATO. Considering what seems to be his strategic direction, Trump wants to make sure he won't have to offer mafia protection to European NATO members if they insist on keep going with their forever war against Russia. It's clear that shutting off Starlink and shutting off satellite ISR would lead to a much faster endgame on the battlefield. The SMO, meanwhile, will keep rolling on, and as the Europeans want it, to the last Ukrainian. He should have said to the Europeans and Lindsey Graham, to the last of the Ukrainians. So I think that's another brilliant piece.
I think so too. And that statement when they say to the last Ukrainian, I hate that.
I know.
It's not their life, it's not their families.
Yeah, I know. It's so barbaric. It is really so barbaric. It's awful.
There's no value to human life at all.
Okay, but this was a terrific analysis, I thought, of the likely military capabilities, of Europe, and the hopelessness of their doing anything against the Russians in the near term, their foolishness in seeking to do something, and also how the Trump administration and its foreign policy ties into all this, and how we are likely going to see the dissolution of NATO before too long. And it's going to be up to the Europeans to bring themselves back, to relevance. And I don't think that relevance in the beginning should be military. I think what they should be going for is to upgrade themselves in science and technology so that they can fully compete in that sphere with the United States and with Russia and China. Because right now, they don't seem to be very relevant in the technology area. They're subordinate in that area. They're subordinate in the military area. They're subordinate when it comes to energy. They're subordinate in terms of what's going on with the economies of Europe. Things look even darker for the Europeans, I think, than they do for the United States. I think they have to get rid of the vassalization of Europe as quickly as they can. They have to declare their independence from other blocs, and they have to start to develop their own resources as quickly as they can. I also think the only way for them to come back is to go green very, very quick way now. Because if they continue their dependence on fossil fuels, they're going to be dependent on someone. And they won't be able to develop as an independent possible actor in a multipolar world.
Exactly, and that independence. France independent, England independent, everybody independent, and being monetary sovereign is crucial. I mean, you look at Europe, you look at countries that gave up their monetary sovereignty for the whole EU thing. I mean, you're not going to heal your country staying in that whole EU bloc.
Yep. I think that's very true. Very, very true. Okay, let us look at our latest comments before we go into Alastair Crooke. And his views, we're about to shift to those things. Uh,
Friar Steve, the European Union. Yeah, but you don't understand being financially independent. Each country needs to be independent. I mean, Italy had spoken about the horror show when they joined the EU. You know, you look at all the different countries when they no longer had that independence, it's a disaster.
yes, it was a disaster. I think the Italians in particular made a big mistake. Had
Hmm.
they stayed outside of the EU and continued to be a monetary sovereign, they could have developed much faster than they have.
Hmm.
That was a serious error. Uh, I'm not going to read every comment here.
Right, because we got to move on.
Yeah.
Yeah, Evelina says here, rifts are forming in the EU. I wonder why.
Yeah, Frosty says there is the desire to have Ukraine surrender, spoken like a true Russian uh, imperialist apologist. If you don't want to have the Ukraine surrender, but you want them to fight on, then what you're doing is to condemn them to further losses of population. Okay, further deaths in Ukraine, and no possibility of a Ukraine that's independent at the end. It's just not going to happen for ISD. The reality is they've lost population. They started with 40 million at the beginning of the war, and now are 18 million people living in there inside, okay, of Ukraine. If they continue fighting for another 2 years, they could well be down to 9 or 10 million people, and they also could well be annexed. All of it could be annexed by Russia if the Russians march to the borders, okay, of Poland. So it's just simply suicide. You're asking them to commit suicide. I mean, I'm not being an apologist for Putin. I'm recognizing the reality. You are not. You should really read Foundation of Geopolitics by Alexander. Unlike you, Doc, the Europeans have read it. Well, not all of them have read it, I believe. But here's what Dugan says about France. France should be encouraged to form a bloc with Germany, because they both have a firm anti-Atlanticist tradition. Uh, France and Germany are in NATO right now, and they both are in the EU. They are already a bloc. The problem is their bloc is not very effective.
No.
It's not an effective bloc. It's a travesty, and it's undemocratic. They've broken their ties to the populace. World War III is a Putin myth. China's not going to help him. It's just Putin and North Korea. Oh, gee. Okay, I'm not going to consider every one of your comments, but Friar Steve, because they are, as you say, hilarious. Sandy Degg says Trump has a Tesla he's trying to sell. Yeah, that's quite funny, I think. Sandy says, hi, Eveline and Steve. Hi, Sandy. Glad you've joined us. Doc, you should visit your last article, Chinese and Russian military industrial complexes building. I know it's building. I know it's building. It's
Mhm.
good it's building because the U.S. won't be able to maintain hegemony by attacking Russia and China.
No.
We won't be able to do it. We won't be able to start World War III or feel confident in starting World War III. And I don't want to see World War III, Friar Steve. That's why I'm glad they're building up their military industrial complex. So we won't dare attack them.
I want to thank Sandy. She said she shared, and we know Sandy. She shares to a lot of groups. Thank you, Sandy.
Thank you, Sandy. Okay, going on. No, something's wrong with my scroller here. Evelyn says grifts are forming in the EU. I wonder why. Economics.
Mm.
Dawn Forster says, I'm here, Joe. I catch up on your shows after the live stream, usually. Well, thank you, Dawn, and I'm glad you're here. Thank you for coming. Fry Steve says, Russia marching to borders of Poland. Now you see why Europe must be involved. The only reason why Russia would march to the borders of Poland is if there's not a peace agreement in the coming months. You're the one who wants Russia to march to the borders of Poland because you want the continuation of the war, Friar Steve, a war you yourself are not willing to fight in. Sandy Dess is glad to see you all.
That's what I say. All the people that are so pushing war, why don't they be the ones to go over there?
Okay, I'm not going to answer.
No, I'm just saying that, and I've heard people say that, especially.
Another comment from Friar Steve. I'll save it for the last time, Doc. Only person talking World War III are you and Putin. That
No,
is
no, no.
absolutely not true. I'm not going to name names, but there are at least 15 other people talking about avoiding World War III. Okay. So I am going to go on to the next piece
Yes.
by Alastair Crooke. And I think it's your turn, Dee.
Yes, it is. Just drank a little tea here.
So you're ready.
Yes, I have hibiscus tea.
Oh, hibiscus tea is delicious, isn't it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so here we go with Alastair Crooke's contribution. I believe this is from March 4th. Let's see. March 4th, yes. Okay, there you go,
Okay.
Dee.
All righty. Yes, March 4th. Reality confronts the Euro ruling strata through the tear in the fantasy bubble, or through the tear in the fantasy bubble. They see their own demise.
Yes, they do.
Shaking my head here.
Elon.
Ugh. Ostensibility. It is not in Europe's interest to mount a concerted resistance against the US president over a failed war. They, the Euro elites, don't have a chance. Quote, if Trump imposes this tariff, 25%, the US will be in a serious trade conflict with the EU, the Norwegian Prime Minister threatens. And what if Brussels does retaliate? Quote, they can try, but they can't, Trump responded. Von der Leyen has, however, already promised that she will retaliate. Nonetheless, the combined suite of the Anglo administrative forces is still unlikely to compel Trump to put U.S. military troops on the ground in Ukraine to protect European interests and investments.
I mean, it's amazing that they would think that they could somehow compel the United States to put our troops on the ground in Ukraine.
Yeah,
The President of the United States doesn't want to do that.
no.
There's no way they could compel that. And also, by the way, it's their own fault,
Hmm.
okay? Because if they had built themselves up as more independent of the United States, then they might actually have more influence on getting the United States to do what they want us to do.
Hmm.
But since they're vassals of the United States, they can do little.
The reality is that every European NATO member, to varying degrees of self-embarrassment, admits publicly now that none of them want to participate in securing Ukraine without having U.S. military troops provide backup to those European forces. This is a probably obviously scheme to inveigle Trump into continuing the Ukraine war, as is Macron and Starmer's dangling of the mineral deal to try to trick Trump to recommit to the Ukraine war. Trump plainly sees through those ploys. The fly in the ointment, however, is that Zelensky seemingly feels a ceasefire more than he fears losing further ground on the battlefield. He too seems to need the war to continue, to preserve continuing in power possibly. Yet he fears a ceasefire more than he fears losing further ground in the battlefield.
Okay, so a comment on that. I saw a news item today saying that uh, uh, he evidently has now agreed to a ceasefire. And so Trump is now restoring some of the military aid he cut off. I don't know what kind of military aid he's going to restore. I think the key thing is he going to restore uh, the ISR capability that they previously had, because they have to have that in order to target attacks on, on Russia. And right now they don't have it. So at this point, I don't know what's going to happen there. But evidently, Zelensky has now agreed to seek a ceasefire. Okay, please go on, Dean.
Trump, calling time on the Ukraine war that has been lost, has seemingly caused European elites to enter some form of cognitive dissonance. Of course, it has been clear for some time that Ukraine would not retake its 1991 borders, nor force Russia into a negotiating position weak enough for the West to be able to dictate its own secession terms. As Adam Collingwood writes, Trump has torn a huge rip in the inferior layer of the fantasy bubble. The governing elite, in the wake of Trump's pivot, can see not just an electoral setback, but rather a literal catastrophe, a defeat in war, with Europe left largely defenseless, a deindustrializing economy, crumbling public services and infrastructure, large fiscal deficits, stagnating living standards, social and ethnic disharmony, and a powerful populist insurgency led by enemies just as grave as Trump and Putin in the Manchin struggle against vestiges of liberal times.
Right, it's the Manichaean struggle
Y-
against
yes,
of liberal times. Please go ahead.
and strategically sandwiched between two leaders that both despise and disdain them. In other words, through the fear in the fantasy bubble, Europe's elites see their own demise. Anyone who could see reality knew that things would only get worse on the war front from autumn 2023. But from their fantasy bubble, our elites couldn't see it. Vladimir Putin, like the quote deplorables and gamins at home, was an atavistic daemon who would inevitably be slain on the exorable march to liberal progressive utopia. Many in the Euro ruling strata clearly are furious. Yet what can Britain or Germany actually do? It has quickly become clear that European states do not have the military capacity to intervene in Ukraine in any concerted manner. But more than anything, as Conor Gallagher points out, it is the European economy circling the drain, largely as a result of the war against Russia, that is dragging reality to the forefront. The new German Chancellor, Friedrich Merz, has shown himself to be the most implacable European leader advocating both military expansion and youth conscription, what amounts to a European resistance model mounted to confront Trump's pivot to Russia. Yet Merz's winning CDU-CSU achieved only 28% of votes cast, whilst losing significant voter share, hardly an outstanding mandate for confronting both Russia and America together. Quote, I am communicating closely with a lot of prime ministers and heads of EU states, and for me it is an absolute priority to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that we achieve independence from the US step by step,
Okay, so,
Frederick Merz said.
okay, in response to that, what I would say is, where's your plan for putting the EU states but together? Obviously, the NATO framework is not sufficient, okay, to do that. I think also, obviously, the combination of the NATO and EU frameworks are not sufficient to do that. And the reason why is
Mm-hmm.
because they have created a super government on top of the democracies of Western Europe, and they've cut off their contacts with the populace itself, okay, and the desires of the populace of all three of those states. The elites have been ruling without much in the way of democratic support. And unless they have a plan for putting themselves together while connecting once again to the populations of their states, they can't hope to oppose Russia. Right now, the people of Russia are very much in back of their government. Putin is extremely popular, and the state and the economy are doing very well. Now, from just a pure common sense point of view, the populations of England and France and Germany together considerably exceed the populations of Russia. We're looking at what? Uh, um, um, 85 million, 70 million, and 66 million,
Mm-hmm.
something like that. It's what, about 215 million compared to the 150 million, okay, of Russia.
Mm-hmm.
So just on a population basis, even just those three countries, without any of the other European countries, if they created tight bonds among
Mm-hmm.
themselves, uh, could themselves become a superpower, at least if they could solve the energy problem. But in order to do that, they have to get their populations in back, okay, of such an endeavor. Okay, and the only way to do that is to create a governmental apparatus where the people in all the states have a voice. But the elites of Europe have done their best to try to undermine popular control of their governments. And this is true of the French government, it's true of the German government, and it's true of the
Mm-hmm.
English government.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, their sidelining of Jeremy Corbyn was nuts, absolutely nuts. Anyway, let's go on.
Okay, second place in the German election was taken by the Alternative for Germany, AfD, with 20% of the national vote. The party was the top vote getter in the 25 to 45-year-old demographic. It supports good relations with Russia and an end to the Ukraine war, and it wants to work with Team Trump too. Yet AFD absurdly is outcast under the quote firewall rules. As a populist party with a strong youth vote, it becomes automatically relegated to the wrong side of the EU firewall. Merz has already refused to share power with them, leaving the CDU as pig in the middle, squeezed between the failing SPD, which lost the most voter share, and the AFD and Der Link, another firewall outcast, which, like AFD, gained voter share, especially among the under 45ers. The rub here, and it is a big one, is that the AFD and the left party, Der Link, 8.8%, which was the top vote getter in the 18 to 24 demographic, are both anti-war. Together, these two have more than one-third of the votes in Parliament, a blocking minority for many important votes, especially for constitutional changes. This will be a big headache for Merz, as Wolfgang Mnuchin explains. For one thing, the new chancellor had wanted to travel to the NATO summit this June, with a strong commitment to higher defense spending. And even though the Left Party and the AFD hate each other in every other respect, they agree that they won't give Merz the money to strengthen the Bundeswehr.
Uh,
Bundeswehr.
the Bundeswehr.
The Bundeswehr. More important, though, is the fact that they won't support a reform to the constitutional fiscal rules, the debt brake, that Merz and the SPD are desperate for.
Yep.
The rules are complicated, but and just dictate that if Germany wants to spend more money on defense and aid to Ukraine, it had to be saved from elsewhere in the budget, most likely from social spending. But politically, saving on social spending to pay for Ukraine hasn't played well with the German electorate. The last coalition failed on precisely this issue.
So here, okay, we have to mention, okay, that there are not only constitutional barriers to this, but there are also barriers from the EU, because
Mhm.
according to EU rules, uh, uh, the, uh, 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 the deficits that EU countries can have are limited to 3%. In other words, deficit spending is limited, okay, to 3%. Okay. If Germany were a monetary sovereign and France, were a monetary sovereign, then they could spend more, okay, on defense and not compromise their social spending. But they're in this problem because they went into the EU, they gave up their currencies, and they no longer are monetary sovereigns. This is something that should be mentioned, okay, in the article, but I don't think that Alastair Crooke really attaches much importance to monetary sovereignty, but it is very important, especially when you get into a situation where you want to spend on defense, but you don't want to cut your social spending. Then the solution is to deficit spend for a while. But if you cannot deficit spend, if you're limited only to 3%, forget it. Then you can't afford the guns and butter. Please go on.
Even with the Greens, Merz still will be short of the two-thirds majority necessary to make constitutional changes, and the center just doesn't have the fiscal space for challenging Russia without U.S. funding. Von der
Okay,
Leyen, yeah,
I have to add again, to emphasize again, even if they could make the constitutional changes, they still wouldn't be able to get by the barrier of 3%, okay, of spending, unless they leave the EU. So they have to get by both of those things, and Alastair isn't mentioning the EU barrier to more spending, only the constitutional barrier. Please go on.
Von der Leyen will try to, quote, magic money for defense from somewhere. But German youth are voting against the establishment parties who are hated. They can build a few leopards if they want. They won't get recruits.
Yep.
Whilst the EU and Britain are proposing to raise billions to arm themselves against some imaginary Russian invasion, it will be done against the backdrop of Trump saying explicitly, on the threat of a Russian invasion of NATO, I don't believe that. I don't believe it. No one little bit. Not one little bit. Another Euro shibboleth ripped by Trump. Thus, how will the European public, which has largely soared under the Ukraine war, react to higher energy costs and make more tax and social service cuts in order to pursue an unwinnable war in Ukraine? Stalin already has been warned that the government debt bond vigilantes will react badly to yet more UK government debt as the fiscal situation wobbles precariously.
Okay, so here is more stupidity. I'm not arguing for war in Ukraine because, of course, I oppose that on all kinds of grounds. But the UK is a monetary sovereign. It can afford the guns and also the butter. It doesn't have to cut into the National Health Service in order to spend more on its military. Okay. But it has trapped itself in the myth that it can only run small deficits itself. They're acting as if they're members of the EU, and they aren't members of the EU. They are a thoroughly monetary sovereign nation, and if they want to run deficits of 10% a year, they can run deficits of 10% a year. Not only that, if they ever got into a serious war, they would find themselves running deficits of 25%, and they wouldn't think twice about it. But now they have this myth, oh, the bond vigilantes are going to react badly to more debt. If the bond vigilantes react badly to more UK government debt, then my advice to Starmer is don't issue the debt. See how they like that. Just spend the money, don't issue the debt. There's no requirement to issue the debt in the British Constitution. There's no requirement at all. They can just spend the money.
Mhm.
Okay, please go ahead.
There are no obvious solutions to Europe's current parliament. It is, on one hand, an existential conundrum for Merz, and on the other, it is the same one that dogs the EU as a whole. To get anything done, a parliamentary majority is a basic necessity.
As it should be within a democracy.
The firewall, though primordially intended to protect the centrists in Brussels from rightist populists, was subsequently turbocharged in Brussels by Biden's issuing of a foreign policy determination to all U.S. foreign policy actors to that effect that populism was a threat to democracy and must be contested. The practical outcome, however, has been that across the EU, blocking coalitions were formed of odd minority party bedfellows agreeing to keep the centrist in power, but which rather has led to endless stasis, and an ever-increasing detachment from we the people. Angela Merkel governed in this way, kicking the can of reform down the road for years, until the situation ultimately became, and still is, insoluble. Quote, can another coalition of short-sighted centrists arrest the decline of the economy, fix the failure of leadership, and free the nation from its pernicious political trap? I think we know the answer, writes Wolfgang Munuschow.
Okay, I think so too, but I want to make an additional comment there. It's not that they're short-sighted centrists, or not alone that. It's that they're short-sighted but neoliberals
Yes.
who believe in what Margaret Thatcher believed in, that the only money that exists is tax money.
Right.
You,
She changed it from public money to tax money.
she's changed it from public money to tax money. Okay, and they believe that. So they believe that in order to do the extra spending, they have to do something about the social spending and they have to raise the taxes. And of course, that puts them into an impossible political situation. So they're in a pernicious political trap. That's the source of their political trap. Their neoliberalism, their foolishness, they're unwilling to consider different economic paradigms.
There lies a bigger problem, however. As Vance explicitly warned at the recent Munich Security Forum, Europe's enemy lies not with Russia, it lies within. It derives Vance implied, from the fact of having a permanent bureaucracy, assuming to itself the exclusive prerogative of autonomous governing power, yet incrementally becoming ever more remote from its own base. Tear down the firewalls, Vance advocated, in order to return to the abandoned principles of that earlier democracy originally shared between the US and Europe. Implicitly, Vance is targeting the Brussels administrative deep state. The Eurocrats see in this new front an alternative American supported attack on their administrative state and perceive therein their own demise. In the US, there is acknowledgement that there is an institutional resistance to Trump. In the DoD, the DOJ, and FBI approves, Margaret Cleveland argues that those touting the need for institutional resistance and the supposed independence from the executive branch are the opponents to democracy and to Trump. Given the close nexus between the US, the British, and European deep state, the question arises as to why there is such strong parallel resistance to Trump amongst European leaders also. Ostensibly, it is not in Europe's interest to mount concerted resistance against the US president over a failed war. It's the European frenzy, then fueled by a wider US deep state desire to neuter the Trump revolution by demonstrating, in addition to the US domestic opposition at home, that Trump is causing havoc amongst the US European allies. Is Europe being pushed further down this path than they would otherwise have chosen to venture? For Germany to change, of course, albeit unthinkable for Merz, it would require only a minimal amount of imagination to envision Germany again linked to Eurasia. The AfD gained 20% of the vote on just such a platform. Really, there probably is little other option.
Yes, and I believe there is little other option also because uh, they do need to have their fossil fuels while they transition to wind and solar, okay, and to
Hmm.
water power. And if cheap fossil fuels are cut off from them, they cannot do the development.
No.
Even if they get the fossil fuels from Russia, it's going to be difficult because, of course, the Russians will pressure them not to shift over to the alternative fuels. They'll pressure them not to go green because the Russians will want to uh, uh, continue to sell their fossil fuels. Okay, so the Europeans have a difficult line to walk to build again. But I think the key to their future is to strengthen their civilian economies and their energy economies, one way or another. They have to do that. There's no other choice, or they will begin to lose uh, their social advances also because they won't be able to afford them. Anyway, I think they're in a tough spot,
Oh, definitely.
in a very tough spot. If they continue to rely on America, they will, of course, have to pay uh, enormous prices for our natural gas. And that puts them into an economic bind all by itself. It's causing the deindustrialization of Germany. Okay, I have to wonder if Canada can help with that. In other words, can they make deals, okay, with Canada where they get very good prices on Canadian fuel? Okay, and if they're dependent on Canada rather than America, it might prove to be better for them. Uh, okay, that's just a thought.
Hmm.
I have no idea how good that particular thought is because I don't know the numbers. Okay, I don't know the resources that would be available to them through Canada. I don't know whether Canada would um, 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 sell to them at prices that are much better than the U.S. would sell to them that. Okay, there is always the problem of transportation across the Atlantic, transportation costs, of course, but there also, is the desire to profit. And that's going to be the case whether it's Canadians who trade with them or whether it's U.S. people who trade with them. Okay, so there is that, I think. They're in a tough spot.
Oh, a very tough spot.
And I think they have to go to the East again. It's the it's the only way for them. I think Putin will play ball. I really do. But we'll just have to see about that.
Yeah, wait and see.
Friar Steve says I will catch the rest of the show later. Evelyn says Mertz seems a transitional figure. Wonder how long he will last. He's not popular. Yeah, he's not popular. I wonder how long he'll last too. Same goes for Starmer in the UK. Any predictions? And Macron is governing without a proper mandate. Yes. Sherry Wise is here and says, hi, Joe and Dee.
Hello, Sherry.
Hello, Sherry. And Evelyn says, didn't Europeans originally give up their economic social? Yes, 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 yes. Stronger than the real in Spain, the lira in Italy, etc. Well, uh, stronger is as strong does. When they gave up their economic sovereignty for the euro, then the individual nations became weak because they were no longer using their own currency and could not issue their own currency. And so they were subject to the rule of deficits of only 3%. And that is their problem today. They must get out of the EU. They must break up the EU. It hasn't been good for them. It took away their monetary power. Evelina says, does the UK have the same reason as the US to perpetuate deficit myth? I don't know if it has the same reason. I mean, a lot of this is just stubbornness and stupidity and failure to read certain books, that are already out there, and just domination of the media by the neoliberals. Uh, it's just as hard to change a narrative over there as it is to change it here. So I think the social configurations are such that they want to perpetuate the deficit myth. Yes. Lana says, hi from the office, okay, in Minneapolis. Hello, Lana. You're there late. It's 10 p.m. your time, and you're still in the office. God. I know it's tax season, but it's still very late. So, shall we go on to our next piece?
Yes, sounds like a good idea.
Okay, are you hanging on pretty well?
Yes.
Okay, I am hanging on pretty well too. I know there's a lot to do tonight. This is another piece by Alastair Crooke. And this is a brand new piece. It came out only today. So please go ahead, Dee.
Oh, I did the last article.
Oh, did you do the last article?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Why did I forget that? Okay. Europe faces a MAGA, quote, vibe shift, unquote, as Trump moves to his primordial objective, the global reset. So Alastair believes that Trump has that objective, that he wants to reset the global system so that it is predominantly peaceful. I wonder about that. I really do wonder about that. So here are Macron and Starmer and Zelensky. If Europe pretends to replace the United States, it is going to be extremely expensive, very politically costly, and it will fail. If Europe pretends to replace the United States, one way for Europe to do it is to unify with a true central government, to have a true federation where the European states are like the US states, where they all share the currency, and where uh, the EU Central Bank, okay, and the European Commission and the IMF are all together to serve the states, where they serve as a national government, and they have to be directly responsible to the people. The European Parliament has to be directly responsible to the people of all nations. I don't think Europe is ready for that kind, okay, of integration. Okay, but unless they have it, they won't be able to spend the amount of money that they need, and they will fail. President Trump wants Ukraine settled, full stop. This is so he can move ahead quickly to normalize with Russia and begin the big picture project of getting a new world order, one that will end wars and facilitate business ties. Yeah, I think this is Trump's objective. The point here, which Europe feigns to not understand, is that the end to the Ukraine conflict simply is Trump's gateway to the entire rationale and platform on which he stood, the great reset of the geopolitical landscape. Ukraine, simply said, is an obstacle to Trump's pursuit of his primordial objective, the global reset. Starmer, Macron, and the eastern wing of the Euro elites are blind to the sheer scale of the global vibe shift towards traditionalist U.S. politics and ethics. They miss, too, the barely concealed fury in the Trump world that exists behind this nascent revolution. Quote, the MAGA right has none of the inhibitions of its predecessor, is planning to leverage the power of a recaptured state to annihilate its enemies, unquote, Alastair Heath writes. The European ruling class is in desperate trouble and increasingly isolated in a world shifting, quote, rightward, quote unquote, at breakneck speed. quote, the U.S. is now the enemy of the West, unquote, the Financial Times proclaims. The European leaders wantonly won't understand. The reality is that the U.S. is engaged now in rolling up Europe's foreign policy and is about to start exporting U.S. traditional Republican values to roll up the European wokist belief system. The European ruling strata, far removed from its base, has failed to grasp the threat to its own interest, a scenario outlined here, and there's a link to another article at Zero Hedge, where a government advisor warns the UK is heading towards a civil war. The Trump administration is trying to rebuild the ailing republic, and Americans in this new era do not care for the European obsession with the ancient feuds and their entailing wars. Trump reportedly views with utter disdain the UK and European boast that should the US not do it, then Europe will. The Brussels class claims to be able still, after 3 years of losing in Ukraine, to be able to inflict a humiliating defeat on President Putin. I can't imagine. It's hard for me to express how foolish this is when Putin is capable of destroying the European capitals with Oreshniks. How can they stand against Putin? If they try to fight, he will use the Oreshniks to inflict unimaginable damage, okay, on their central cities. Okay, and the European states are very much organized around their central cities. Where would the UK be without any London left? Where would France be without Paris? Where would Germany be with no Berlin? I mean, these are real possibilities. Even if Putin doesn't use any nuclear arms, I don't think the European leaders understand the new military capabilities of Russia. They need years of building to equal those capabilities. They are not ready right now to fight alone. They just are not ready. More profoundly, however, Team Trump, committed to the task of taking down the American deep state as the, quote, inexorable enemy, unquote, perceives rightly the British security state to be co-joined at the hip with their American counterparts as part of its global metastructure. And its oldest and deepest component has always been the destruction of Russia and its dismemberment. Again, this is ridiculous, and particularly ridiculous without the United States. So Macron, in an address to the nation this week, rejected a ceasefire in Ukraine and declared that, quote, peace in Europe is only possible with a weakened by Russia, unquote, calling the country a direct threat to France and the continent. Many in Trump world will interpret this defiant declaration that, quote, Ukraine defeating Russia is preferable to peace, unquote. It may be preferable to peace, but there's no Ukraine defeating Russia going on. It's nothing more than Starmer and Macron ventriloquizing or ventriloquizing the aims of the meta deep state. This notion is lent substance by the sudden plethora of articles appearing in the European managed MSM to the effect that Russia's economy is much weaker than it appears and might collapse in the next year. Of course, it is nonsense. This is about managing the European public to believe that keeping the war going in Ukraine is a, quote, good idea, unquote. The absurdity of the European position was perhaps best captured, as Wolfgang Munchau notes, in its full hubris last year by the historian and writer Anne Applebaum when she won a prestigious German Peace Prize. A Peace Prize? Her, a Peace Prize! Oh, that's a laugh. She's always wanted war, never peace, always for hegemony of the West. Going on with the article. During her acceptance speech, she maintained that victory was more important than peace, asserting that the West's ultimate goal should be regime change in Russia. Quote, we must help Ukrainians achieve victory, and not only for the sake of Ukraine, unquote, she said. Zelensky and his European fans want, quote, to negotiate, unquote, though later rather than sooner, perhaps in a year, as one European foreign minister reportedly said to Marco Rubio privately. If they wait a year to negotiate, Kharkov will be gone, Odessa will be gone, also Nikolaev, and the other province that is on the straight line from Kharkov through two provinces to Odessa. That's what will happen. The Russians will take 4 more oblasts. And Ukraine will be virtually gone as a significant state. 4 more oblasts and probably another 8 million people in those oblasts. And the population of Ukraine will then be down to 12 million. And the Poles and the Hungarians will want those other provinces. I mean, this is ridiculous. Anne Applebaum is ridiculous. Zelensky and his European fans want, quote, to negotiate, unquote, though later rather than sooner, perhaps in a year, as one European foreign minister reportedly said to Marco Rubio privately. Quote, this, unquote, says Mr. Munchau, quote again, is what the very public disagreement in the Oval Office last week was all about. Peace through untrammeled victory, essentially the Second World War model as the lens through which virtually all European leaders and most commentators view the Russia-Ukraine conflict, unquote. Well, I just have to remind everybody that the Second World War model was applied to Germany, which at the time was a nation of 70 million people. It's much more difficult to apply that model to a nation of 150 million people, much to the east, of Germany. I mean, this is all ridiculous. The U.S. sees things differently. It views almost certainly the European deep state to be putting a spoke into Trump's, quote, normalization with Russia, unquote, wheel, a normalization to which they're viscerally opposed, or at the very least, as the Europeans chasing a, quote, mirage that no longer exists, stubbornly hiking, quote, tax and spend, unquote, whilst doubling down on mass immigration and overpriced energy, oblivious to the flashing red lights in the financial markets as government debt yields rocket to their highest level since 1998, as Alastair outlines. That quote, again, is important from the standpoint of the monetary sovereignty idea because the Europeans can't afford to have their government debts go all the way up. For that to happen, for that to be tolerated, it would be necessary for the EU to become a government and for it to act as a monetary sovereign with respect to its constituent states. That is not going to happen. The other alternative, of course, is for the Europeans to get out of the EU to reclaim their monetary sovereignty. Then they would be able to afford to spend far more on the military, but then they would have another problem. And that problem would be integrating the militaries of the various states so they could serve as a unit. We're looking at years of change here, folks. That cannot happen because Ukraine doesn't have years, it has weeks or months. The war will end by then because the Russians will end it. In other words, the suggestion is that Friedrich Merz, Macron, and Starmer are talking about how they're going to turn around their countries via a massive infusion of debt into defense superstates. Yet at some level of conscience, they must realize that is not doable. So they settle instead for presenting themselves as, quote, world leaders on the international stage, unquote. The European elites are deeply unstable, quote, leaders, unquote, who are risking the prosperity and stability of the continent. It is clear these countries do not have the military capacity to intervene in any concerted manner. More than anything, it is the European economy circling the drain that is the reality at the gates. And I think Alastair is so right about that. It's circling the game. That is the reality at the gates. And unless the United States were willing to sell our natural gas at the same prices as the Russian natural gas and sell our oil at the same prices, at the Russian oil to the Europeans, their economies will continue to circle the drain. And that is also the reality at the gates. Going on with the article, Zelensky is accomplice to the European insistence that defeating Russia takes priority over achieving peace in Ukraine. In spite of lacking any strategic rationale as to how it may be achieved after 3 years of a worsening military situation, both plans, crushing the Russian economy with sanctions and attrition of the Russian military to the point of collapse, have failed. Why does then Zelensky resist Trump's peace proposals? On the surface, it makes no sense. The explanation likely goes back to the post-Maidan era, when the Western, quote, meta-security state, principally the British and Americans, entrenched hardline Banderites, then a tiny minority, into the Ukrainian police, intelligence, and security state. They are still today the controlling force, even with this faction to acknowledge that their war cannot be won. They understand what happens if they lose. Russia will not deal with them. They view them as extremists, if not war criminals, who are in no way, quote, agreement capable, unquote, and must be replaced by a leadership who is actually capable of compromise. Russia would likely pursue and bring these men to trial. Zelensky has to be frightened at what the Banderites might do to him, despite his British team of bodyguards. Well, Trump is not entertaining these European games, quote unquote. He is administering a slapdown to Zelensky and European leaders, perhaps bringing Zelensky into line, or perhaps not. Team Trump Political Reports has now entered in direct talks with the Ukrainian opposition on holding early elections to unseat Zelensky, who is on his way to being removed, members of Team Trump say. So that's why Zelensky agreed to back the idea of a ceasefire today. That was a concession he felt he had to make to Trump, because if he didn't, he was going to be replaced anyway. Zelensky may be finished, but interestingly, Zelensky wasn't discussed either. He's being groomed by the British as a replacement. Looks like the Americans are going to make this decision independently of the British, too. President Trump has ordered intelligence sharing with Ukraine stopped. Now, as I said earlier, whether this will now be resumed because of the agreement by Zelensky with the ceasefire idea, I don't know. We have to see. What he technically did was to stop allowing Ukraine to use exclusive U.S. targeting systems controlled by U.S. intelligence, CIA, the National Reconnaissance Office, and U.S. National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. What has been suspended is the exchange of so called lethal data, including information for HIMARS targeting. However, the defensive information needed for protection is still being provided to Ukraine. The extent of the quote, the extent of the intelligence sharing freeze, which appears to have been imposed alongside the halt in military aid Mr. Trump announced on Monday, initially appears to be somewhat okay, appears to be limited somewhat. But by Wednesday afternoon, it became clear the Trump administration, ignoring overtures from Mr. Zelensky the previous evening, had gone much further. A military intelligence officer in Kyiv uh, told the Telegraph that the freeze amounted to, quote, more or less a total blackout, unquote. Put bluntly, the earlier munitions freeze will undoubtedly affect the military abilities of Ukraine over time. However, the impact might not be felt for some weeks. The loss of vital intelligence, however, will make its mark immediately. It will simply put blind Ukraine and Ukrainian command posts, the battle tracking and satellite online feeds on tablets and TV screens have indeed been disconnected. What Trump's slapdown has done is to puncture the fiction that Ukraine is able to defend itself with a little substitute of European support. That has always been nonsensical bravado. NATO, the CIA, and the global intelligence community have been in control of the war fighting from the outset, and that for now has been switched off. So Europe wants to shoulder the U.S. burden. Bloomberg reports that European bond markets are in meltdown. If Europe pretends to replace the U.S., it is going to be extremely expensive, very politically costly, and it will fail. And by the way, that is an understatement. It is an understatement. If the Europeans keep on pushing that, remember the bond vigilantes are essential to Europe because the nations are no longer monetarily sovereigns. If they refuse to buy debt, those economies are going to collapse. So, do you have any comments, Steve?
It's just as the more articles we read, it's just showing. It's the same narrative of the neoliberalism, and Europe's Europe's a mess with neoliberalism. So are we. And when you talked about the sovereignty, monetary sovereignty, it's crucial, and we keep going over and over and over again with this whole with the tax, with the bonds and all that. They just trying to act like this is reality, that this is real, and it's just fake what they're doing. They're creating these own rules that are ridiculous.
Yes, and I think our treatment of monetary sovereignty really adds a lot, okay, to the analyses that are coming out of Pepe Escobar and Alastair Crooke and Jeff Sachs, okay, and the other folks who talk about these issues. None of them recognize the importance of the lack of monetary sovereignty of Europe, okay, and the existence of monetary sovereignty here in the United States, and the increasing existence of monetary sovereignty in Russia as well,
Hmm.
because Russia has been gaining back its monetary sovereignty over a long period of time and is now monetarily very strong.
Hmm.
So there is that. I think the Russians can run whatever deficits they need to run to fight the war, but the Europeans don't have that kind, okay, of capability. I think the Russians, by the way, by now are somewhat into MMT.
Yes, they are. That's
Yes,
what got them out of the neoliberal mess
yes.
they were in.
I think so. I don't think they're strict kinds of MMTers, but I think they're using some of the insights, and that has helped them. So Lana says, hi from the office in Minneapolis. Hi, Lana, Steve, and Sherry. And Sherry says, hi, Lana and Steve. Sherry says, it's stunning how these neoliberal governments just keep digging themselves in deeper and deeper. They can't ever learn, of course. That's not what they are paid to do. Lana says, sorry, I wasn't looking at the comments. Hi, Steve, Sherry, D. Sherry says,
Atlanta.
Sherry says they're so bought into the neoliberalism, and they are also totally corrupt.
Exactly.
And Sherry says this is why we need keep pushing the idea of public money.
Yes.
We do keep pushing it here all the time. We keep pushing it, and that is the advantage. One of the big advantages of our live streams over all the other live streams that are around and that are commenting on these particular subjects. They don't have the monetary sovereignty perspective. They don't have the MMT lens, and we do. And that's important to the analysis that we have now. Anyway, we have one more piece to go over, and
Yes.
that is by Jeff Sachs. And I think that's your turn.
Yes, it is.
I will put it up for you, D.
Okay.
And this is a relatively simple article with simple ideas, and we have to keep
Okay.
that in mind when discussing it.
Okay.
Okay, here it is. Oh, there's a Ukrainian soldier
And it says common dreams.
from Common Dreams. A Ukrainian serviceman of the 24th Mechanized Brigade takes position by sandbags covered with camouflage netting as smoke billows nearby during a training drill at an undisclosed location in the eastern region of Ukraine on March 4th, 2025, and amid the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So that was that photo. So here's the article, D. Please go ahead.
Okay. Negotiating a lasting peace in Ukraine. The time has arrived for diplomacy that brings collective security to Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. There should be little doubt about how a lasting peace can be established in Ukraine. In April 2022, Russia and Ukraine were on the verge of signing a peace agreement in Istanbul, with the Turkish government acting as a mediator. The US and UK talked Ukraine out of signing the agreement, and hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have since died or been seriously injured.
I have to correct that.
Mhm.
The analyses of Scott Ritter, okay, Colonel McGregor, which are different, okay, and based on different facts, but both agree that there have been more than 1 million fatalities inside of Ukraine. And to that, we have to add hundreds of thousands of other casualties, okay, as well. So I felt it was
Okay.
necessary to make that correction.
Okay.
Wait,
Oops. Too fast.
scrolled it too fast. Yes.
Okay. Yet the framework of the Istanbul process still provides the basis of peace today. The draft peace agreement dated April 15th, 2022, and the Istanbul communique dated March 29th, 2022, on which it was based, offered a sensible and straightforward way to end the conflict. It's true that 3 years after Ukraine broke off the negotiations, during which time Ukraine has incurred major losses, Ukraine will eventually cede more territory than it would have in April 2022. Yet it will gain the essentials: sovereignty, international security arrangements, and peace. In the 2022 negotiations, the agreed issues were Ukraine's permanent neutrality and international security guarantees for Ukraine. The final disposition of the contested territories was to be decided over time, based on negotiations between the parties during which both sides committed to refrain from using force to change boundaries. Given the current realities, Ukraine will cede Crimea and parts of the southern and eastern Ukraine, reflecting the battlefield outcomes of the past 3 years. Such an agreement can be signed almost immediately, and in fact is likely to be signed in the coming months, as the US is no longer going to underwrite the war, in which Ukraine would suffer yet more casualties, destruction, and loss of territory. Zelensky is recognizing that it's time to negotiate. In his address to Congress, President Donald Trump quoted Zelensky as saying, quote, Ukraine is ready to come to the negotiating table as soon as possible to bring lasting peace closer. The pending issues in April of 2022 involved the specifics of security guarantees for Ukraine and the revised boundaries of Ukraine and Russia. The main issue regarding the guarantees involved the role of Russia as co-guarantor of the agreement. Ukraine insisted that the Western co-guarantors should be able to act with or without Russia's assent, so as not to give Russia a veto over Ukraine's security. Russia sought to avoid a situation where Ukraine and its Western co-guarantors would manipulate the agreement to justify renewed force against Russia. Both sides have a point. The best resolution, in my view, is to put the security guarantees under the authority of the UN Security Council. This means that the US, China, Russia, UK, and France would all be co-guarantees together with the rest of the UN Security Council. This would subject the security guarantees to global scrutiny. Yes, Russia could veto a subsequent UN Security Council resolution regarding Ukraine, but it would then face China's opprobrium and the world's if Russia were to act arbitrarily in defiance of the will of the rest of the UN. Regarding the final disposition of borders, some background is very important. Before the violent overthrow of Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych in February of 2014, Russia did not make any territorial demands vis-à-vis Ukraine. Yanukovych favored neutrality for Ukraine, opposed NATO membership, and peacefully negotiated with Russia a 20-year lease for Russia's naval base in Sevastopol, Crimea, home of Russia's Black Sea Fleet since 1783. After Yanukovych was toppled and replaced by a US-backed pro-NATO government, Russia moved quickly to retake Crimea to prevent the naval base from falling into NATO hands. During 2014 to 2021, Russia did not push for annexing any other Ukrainian territory. Russia called for the political autonomy of the ethnic Russian regions of eastern Ukraine, Donetsk and Luhansk, that broke away from Kyiv immediately after Yanukovych was toppled. The Minsk II agreement was to implement autonomy. The Minsk framework was inspired in part by the autonomy of the ethnic German region of South Tyrol in Italy. German Chancellor Angela Merkel knew the South Tyrol experience and viewed it as a precedent for similar autonomy in the Donbass. Unfortunately, Ukraine strongly resisted autonomy for the Donbass, and the US backed Ukraine in rejecting autonomy. Germany and France, which ostensibly were guarantors of Minsk II, stood by silently as the agreement was thrown aside by Ukraine and the United States. Following 6 years in which Minsk II was not implemented, during which the US armored Ukrainian military continued to shell the Donbass in an attempt to subdue and recover the breakaway provinces, Russia recognized Donetsk and Luhansk as independent states on February 21, 2022. The status of Donetsk and Luhansk in the Istanbul process was still to be finalized. Perhaps a return to Minsk II and its actual implementation by Ukraine, recognizing the autonomy of the two regions in the Ukrainian constitution, could have been ultimately agreed. When Ukraine walked away from the negotiating table, alas, the issue was moot. A few months later, on September 30th, 2022, Russia annexed the two oblasts as well as two others, Kherson and South Savaya. The sad lesson in this, Ukraine's loss of territory would have been averted entirely but for the violent coup that toppled Yankovic and brought in a US-backed regime intent on NATO membership. The loss of territory in eastern Ukraine could have been averted had the US pushed Ukraine to implement the UN Security Council-backed Minsk agreement. The loss of territory in eastern Ukraine could probably have been averted as late as April 2022 in the Istanbul process, but the US blocked the peace agreement. Now, after 11 years of war since the overthrow of Yankovic, and as a result of Ukraine's losses on the battlefield, Ukraine will cede Crimea and other territories of eastern and southern Ukraine in the coming negotiations. Europe has other interests that it should be negotiating with Russia, notably security for the Baltic states and for European-Russian security arrangements more generally. The Baltic states feel very vulnerable to Russia, understandably so given their history, but they have also gravely and unnecessarily added to their vulnerability by a stream of repressive measures taken against their ethnic Russian citizenry, including measures to repress the use of the Russian language and measures to cut their citizen ties with Russian Orthodox Church. Baltic state leaders are also provocatively engaging in remarkable Russophobic rhetoric. Ethnic Russians are about 25% of the population of both Estonia and Latvia, and around 5% in Lithuania. Security for the Baltic states should be achieved through security-enhancing measures taken on both sides, including the respect for minority rights of the ethnic Russian populations, and by refraining from rhetoric. The time has arrived for diplomacy that brings collective security to Europe, Ukraine, and Russia. Europe should open direct talks with Russia and should urge Russia and Ukraine to sign a peace agreement based on the March 29 Istanbul communique and the April 15, 2022 draft peace agreement. Peace in Ukraine should be followed by the creation of a new system of collective security for all of Europe, stretching from Britain to the Urals and indeed beyond.
Okay, so what'd you think of that?
I thought it was very good, very well explained. Really talked about the history. Well put together.
Okay, but in the context of the other articles, okay, that we've been reading from Pepe and from Alastair, it's clear that the European elites stand strongly against this. They don't want to do anything like this. They still want to continue the war. Okay, now Trump is trying to crush their opposition. Okay, at this point,
Right, it's just a waste of time to continue this. Accept reality. Look
it's
how
not,
much they've lost.
it's not just a waste of time. It's a waste of lives.
Yes, it is.
It's a waste of lives, and they're mostly Ukrainian lives.
Oh, yes.
Uh, if the Europeans want to get, though, directly involved, it will soon be a waste of Russian lives and a waste of European lives also.
Right. And we look at the people that, refugees, Ukrainians that left that want to go back to Ukraine.
I'm sure they want to go back to Ukraine, but okay, and okay, I think the following is interesting. I think a lot of the refugees have left would probably want to go back to their homes in Ukraine, whether those homes are in Ukraine or whether those homes are in Russia.
Right.
There are probably a lot of people who have gotten out of Zaporozhye and Kherson, okay, and Donetsk and Luhansk as well, who wouldn't mind going back to their homes, might even prefer going back to their homes if they were under Russian rule, as opposed to Ukrainian rule. Okay, I don't know about that, really,
But
but
right, but some of these territories had more people that were, um, you would say more Russian, even though they lived in Ukraine. But there was always that relationship and friendliness between Ukraine and Russia.
yes, between the Ukrainian people, okay, and Russian people, that was disturbed by the overthrow, okay, of Yanukovych,
Yes.
okay, and the hostile activities of the new regime that took over, and of course the shelling of the Russian populations uh, after 2014 by the Ukrainian government. Okay, but okay, it seems to me that the primary barriers to the kind of peace agreement that Jeff is talking about here are now increasingly over in Europe, because Trump's foreign policy for the U.S. has certainly changed. And he is probably willing to arrive at the kind of peace agreement that Jeff Sachs is talking about here. The question is whether Zelensky and the Europeans are going to go along. Now, he's going to exert tremendous pressure on them to go along, but the question is, uh, how likely is he to get them to go along if he's at the same time engaging in a tariff war against the Europeans? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
his actions on many fronts, okay, are very contradictory. And his tariff war with Europe could undermine the peace negotiations. Just a thought. Okay, but when we look at all the articles we went over tonight, collectively, I think we see a continuing shifting of power and economic activity over to the Eurasian world. I see the Russians getting stronger. I see the Chinese getting far stronger. I see the alliances of the Russians and Chinese and the North Koreans and the Iranians, okay, all getting stronger, and the integration of the Eurasian world getting stronger, okay, in general. I see the conflict, okay, in the West centered inside, okay, of Ukraine. I see a struggle to try to end, okay, that particular conflict, but I see the Europeans really strongly resisting right now. If the European governments were to change, that would help things. Okay, but I think the recent elections in France weakened the French elites, and Macron in particular, but did not dispose of Macron. And the same outcome occurred, okay, in Germany. I think the Christian Democrats were strongly weakened, okay, in Germany, and their coalition with the SPD and the Greens was certainly weakened as well. But still, the Prime Minister of Germany, okay, is going to be a Christian Democrat, okay, and one who is very much in favor, okay, of the Ukraine war. So the regimes haven't changed in those two countries, and there was no change in Britain because the foreign policy of Keir Starmer seems to be very similar to the foreign policy of the Conservatives. So while the European elites are threatened, they are not yet changing in the major powers of Europe. And the elites in those major powers are still resisting the idea of peace inside of Ukraine. I don't think it's clear what kind of trouble they will cause. I know they will try to cause trouble and try to drag the United States away from making a peace with Russia inside of Ukraine. I don't think Trump's going to allow that. I think he will fight against it. But his tariff war is weakening him here, in the United States. His popularity is tanking in the United States. His involvement with Elon, his acceptance of the ideas of austerity for the federal government, his bullshit about waste, fraud, and abuse. There's some of that, in any bureaucracy, but that's not what's behind his campaign. What's behind his campaign is he wants to cripple the administrative state, and he wants to go after the deep state. And in the process, he's doing all kinds of damages to areas that have nothing to do with the deep state, like Social Security. I mean, the whole waste, fraud, and abuse thing is spilling over into many other areas of the federal government where the bureaucracy performing necessary functions is being destroyed, and Trump is getting more and more and more unpopular. And his unpopularity in those areas can restrict his freedom of movement in foreign policy and can begin to hurt him in his efforts to negotiate peace. So I think there are a lot of strange trends that are going on at the same time, and I don't know how this is all going to work out. I don't know how stubborn Trump is going to be about the tariff wars. I don't know how stubborn he's going to be in the area of crippling the federal government and trying to turn everything over to the oligarchs in Silicon Valley. From my point of view, he's trying to do many contradictory things at once, and he's creating accelerating chaos here in the United States while he's trying to pursue a foreign policy that is not necessarily popular, but is necessary for the United States to pursue. And I haven't even factored in, at this point, the problems, in Israel and what he's going to do concerning the Middle East. A few days ago, there was an attack by the Iranians, on Israel. I don't think it was the promised, true promise 3, but it was a serious missile attack, on Israel. The Houthis, are about to once again pursue their attack on Israel, because of what the Israelis have been doing with the ceasefire. They've been undermining the ceasefire, of course. Things look very uncertain right now in terms of the Middle East, and it looks like the Iranians have taken the time that they've had during the ceasefire period to grow stronger. Their air defense is now stronger, and they've brought in Su-35s to counter to F-35s to augment their air force. And the information is that they now have a squadron of Su-35s there, which will be ready to engage the F-35s when they attempt an attack on Iran. This is going to make it much more difficult, for the Israelis to do damage. Also, the anti-aircraft capabilities, the air defenses of the Iranians have been greatly strengthened over the period since November of last year. Uh, I think it's looking very difficult for the policies the Israelis have been trying to follow, and they ought to stop following those policies. I think that's the only chance for their survival. But Trump, as Sandy Degg says here, he has his fingers in too many pies, and I don't know that his global policy is completely consistent. We haven't really seen the drive to peace inside of the Middle East. We've seen some of it, but uh, it's still dangerously explosive, and we don't know what Trump is going to do about this. Meanwhile,
Mm-hmm.
um, uh, um, in the background, there is Chinese projects, Chinese advances, okay, and Russian advances, okay, on the technology front, and further strengthening of the Belt and Road Initiative. And meanwhile, we are making no progress at all on the larger stage of things. So that's how I would uh, 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 put it all together. Uh, uh, but okay, I think the Europeans are big flies in the ointment right now, and that what they are doing, okay, is ridiculous. So, to check out some more comments to wind up our video here. Sherry says Jeff Sachs is on a roll. Yep. Lana says I'm in the car on the way home now. Lana says the people who still think Ukraine can win this war, okay, are out of it. Yeah, they are out of it. There's no chance they can win this war. Sherry says, Lana, thanks for sending me that video of Sachs at the EU. Great video. It is a great video. He gave a great speech to the EU, which we covered some time ago here.
Yes, we did. Yes.
Yeah, before the break. Sherry says, yeah, I'm wondering how long it will be until Trump throws Musk overboard. Well, that would be a big step for him, but a necessary step to restore, his own clarity here. Sandy rightly says he has his finger in too many pies. Loudon says, Sherry, no problem. I actually got it from Teresa. And Evelina says, Trump has walked back the ban, okay, on NED. That, of course, is NED is National Endowment for Democracy, and they have been implicated in many regime change operations. And I'm sure the Russians are not pleased that he has walked back the ban, okay, on NED. Evelina says, surely not with a public purpose. No, it's not with a public purpose. He's still tending to support, okay, the regime change operations, though I suspect that now he will focus them more on Latin America, probably, and with the full support in that respect of Marco Rubio. Well, Dee, any more comments or?
Yes, I was thinking, with the remark about with Elon Musk falling. I mean that's coming. I mean it's happening right now, and the more he's with Trump, the more he's saying the things he's saying. His stocks are going down, Tesla, and he's being affected by all of this. And the outcome is going to be is he has to make a decision whether he wants to be hanging out with Trump or if he wants, to get himself back in shape. I mean, he's falling apart financially, really, with all of his nonsense.
Yeah, his businesses have been falling apart. He's experienced a paper loss in excess of 111 billion. The last figure I heard on that was 111 billion. But I've also heard that Tesla stock has fallen uh, uh, um, since the inauguration of Donald Trump by 140 billion.
Yes, that's where his wealth is, in stocks.
Yeah, that's the major source of his wealth. And so he does have to pay attention to that. And I don't think he has the time, to get into every aspect of the federal government and to do what needs to be done. And by the way, with the court cases that are going on, okay, what's going to happen is that the Trump administration is going to have to pay more attention to details when it cuts. It's not just going to be able to cut for the sake of breaking things. It's going to have to be careful about who it's cutting and whether those people are necessary for the government, because the courts are going to demand that, okay, as well. So I don't think the mass firings are going to stick. I think a number of people are going to have to be rehired, and I think they have to be going to have to be more careful in their cuts and make sure they're in line with the will of Congress, and make sure they're also sensible cuts that really have something to do with waste, fraud, and abuse, so called, and are not about simply cutting programs they disagree with, but which Congress has mandated. There are going to have to be changes in that way. And if there are changes in that way, then Elon is not going to be so useful anymore, because Elon's not interested in that sort of thing. Sherry says, I wonder who will go down first. Will it be Musk or um, um, Malay? Okay, Malay, of course, is the president of Argentina right now, and he's been acting like Musk on steroids down there, and the economy of Argentina has been suffering as a result, and all kinds of people have been suffering, and if it keeps up, there's likely to be some violence down there. Sandy says Elon is another one who has inserted himself into places he shouldn't be, of course, things he doesn't know anything about. He's trying to treat the federal government as if it's a private sector company he owns. And he can't do that because he doesn't own it. We own it. And we don't want him to do the things he's doing. When I say we, I mean the people of the United States. The government is owned by us. Sherry Wise says the other thing about the cuts is the effect on veterans that is making people mad. Yes, it's making the veterans mad, and it's making people related to them mad, and it's making all kinds of people very, very angry. And everyone is saying no one elected Elon Musk, and get him out of there. And there are demonstrations all over the country, and there are demonstrations at Tesla dealerships, and there are people getting arrested at Tesla dealerships also. I shouldn't say Tesla dealerships because I don't think they're really dealerships. They're Tesla sales outlets. They're actually, I think they're owned by Tesla itself.
And I have to say, when it comes to the VA, obviously, the veterans and the VA should not be cut. There's no reason to cut anything. And we know what's behind all of this. It's that for years, they've been wanting to privatize the VA for profit.
Yes, and by the way, the same goes for Social Security. There's no reason to cut Social Security. It's already been cut over many years, and it's not good at providing services to people. If you've been in the last 10 years to a Social Security office to get something settled at a Social Security office, you have to wait for many hours. I mean, often you have to wait for 2 hours outside in the cold in order to get into a Social Security office. And then once you get inside and sit down, you have to wait for 2 more hours before they can serve you. That service is not there because they don't have enough people. They don't have enough people to service the phones. The bureaucracy has been degraded because the funding isn't adequate coming from Congress. It's already been cut.
Right. And what they've done too is a lot of the local Social Security offices have been shut down. So
Yes, I'm
people
talking.
have to drive, longer to go to the one facility that's too small,
That's
really, to service the amount of people it needs to service.
that's too small, and they have to wait online. And they have to wait online for hours and hours and hours to get served. And so, of course, the Republicans will say, well, it's because the government workers are so bad and government is inefficient. That's crap. There are not enough workers there to service people. That's why the service is bad.
Right. Because it's about serving the people. It's not about profit. And they want to take apart everything for
Yes,
profit.
yes, I know. And they need to be kicked out of the government. They don't belong in the government. They're the anti government party. They want to get rid of the government. I mean, electing them to power in government is stupid.
Mm-hmm.
It's stupid. The Republican Party needs to be destroyed. As far as the Democratic Party is concerned, maybe they would be barely acceptable as uh, the opposition party to a new left wing party that ought to emerge. We need the whole Overton window shifted over to the left in this country.
Exactly.
We need a new lefty party that really serves the people, and the Democrats need to become the right wing party because that's the way they act.
They do. They are to the right. Everything's about corporations and their
Yes,
profit.
right. They're not as much to the right as the Republicans are, but the Republicans have become a fascist party. We need to get rid of them. Sandy says Trump did basically a commercial for Tesla today in front of the White House. He supposedly bought a Tesla for his granddaughter. This admission is like a circus.
Yeah,
This
this administration.
is like a circus. Yes,
It
Sandy.
is. It
I,
is.
I know Trump likes the circus. He's a carnival barker, and he likes the circus.
Definitely. He loves the attention. That's why he was
Yes,
campaigning the whole time he was out of office. He just loves the attention.
yes. Okay, folks, I'm going to have to close up at this point. I'd love to continue discussing for hours and hours, but uh, I do have to get up relatively early tomorrow because we do have to get out of here. We have an appointment in Tyson's Corner, so we want to get up at a decent hour.
Okay, Sherry just has one more comment down here.
They also think they can make all kinds of jobs totally AI. Mike Brock and Joshua Stileman on Substack have talked about this. Yeah, I know they think they can make all kinds of jobs totally AI. Fine. Let them make all kinds of jobs totally AI and let them implement at the same time a job guarantee program.
Mm-hmm.
Because there will always be jobs for humans to do. But also, before they think about making all kinds of jobs, but totally AI, we need thorough testing of the AIs. It has to be considered highly experimental, and there have to be pilot projects before they do anything about cutting any people, okay, in the federal government. And those experiments have to be run by government employees. We can't bring in people from the private sector to run them because the people from the private sector always want to cut the government. They have a bias towards cutting the government, whether it's needed or not. We can't have those people running the government or making decisions about cuts on federal workers because they are hostile to federal workers and they
Mm-hmm.
are hostile to the federal government. We need the federal workers to make the decisions themselves based on rational criteria. And we need to have a safety net for what's going on with AI. And that safety net is the federal job guarantee program. We need to pass the federal job guarantee program first and then worry about advances through AI, okay, in the federal government. Sandy Deck said he even had a script. Yeah. Sherry says good scream and discussion. Thank you. And Lana Dell says good night.
On that note, good night, everybody, and good night, Bonnie, and
Good night.
and don't forget Joe's Patreon.com, Joe_Firestone, and his Buy Me a Coffee as well.
Right. And thank you. And do not forget also Dee has a Cash App.
Yes, Dolores Pierce, and Venmo Dolores Pierce, PayPal Dolores Pierce.
Okay, so it's always Dolores Pierce at those three outlets.
Yes.
We do need your contributions to keep things going. And by the way, Sandy, thank you very much for your periodic contributions. And thank you, Lana, okay, as well. Sandy says, have a wonderful night. Thank you, Joe, Dee, Bonnie, and everyone. Sandy leaves a heart. Thank you for
Thank you. Yes, thank you for being here, everyone.
appreciate it.
And good night, Evelina.
Okay, good night, Evelina, and thank you very much for your support, okay, as well. Okay, by the way, talk a little bit about the future. Okay, are you having a show tomorrow night, Dee?
Yes, are you going to join me?
I will very much try to join you tomorrow night. I still have something very important to do in the private area, but I will try to join you tomorrow night. On Thursday night, I'll be back with a domestic stream. Okay, there's been actually a lot of very good pieces from Stephanie Kelton that have come out uh, of late, and also a couple of pieces um, from Nathan have come out also. I don't know if I want to go through those, but I'll see. They are there. But also there are other things about domestic politics that we have to cover because they are so stupid, and we have to call attention to the stupidity.
Yes,
And
that's true.
I think in my hour on Thursday night, my hour and 15 minutes from 8 to 9:15, I'm going to cover that stuff, and then I'll be joining Dee for her Thursday night show, as usual.
Sounds good.
It also might be necessary to have an extra show for me on Friday night anyway.
Okay.
I'll see about that because there's a lot of catching up to do in the international sphere also.
Right, because we could do that at 9 o'clock. We'll have the one show with, you know, we'll do a
Yes.
show together at 9.
Okay, great. Okay, that'll be great. So, and then of course I'll be back on Saturday night with another show,
Mm-hmm.
as usual. So thank you everyone, and once again, good night.
And good night, everyone.
Good night.
Night.
I will end the stream now. Talk about the LinkedIn stories.